Thank you, Robbie. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Andrew Heath, Deputy Chief Engineer for the Georgia Department of Transportation. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you. From what I understand, there are about 260 registered attendees. How many sponsors? 70-ish sponsors, which from what I understand is a record number. So that's obviously very exciting. Record numbers on spring break week, nonetheless. So give you guys a lot of credit for being here. Again, it's an honor for Georgia DOT to host this event. I hope that while you're here, you get to experience a little bit of Georgia, a little bit of Atlanta. Here at this location is a fantastic location to see downtown Atlanta and get to see a little bit about what we are about as a state. But I get the fun part of this. I get what I call the Chamber of Commerce part of this, to welcome you all to the state and to the region. So hopefully this is a little bit fun and a little bit interesting as I kind of walk through this. Robbie and Donn are going to come up and provide a little bit of a deeper overview of our bridge programs and our bridge preservation programs as we work to manage and oversee the 10th largest transportation system in the country. And we obviously stand, not just in Georgia, but in the Southeast, in an incredibly exciting time as it relates to transportation, and we have tremendous challenges as it relates to the growth of the region and what's happening in and around the Southeast United States. But that makes working for a DOT or doing a job that helps support transportation certainly very interesting and very exciting. So let's kind of walk through this. I've got some notes because honestly, as I show some of these folks, you will know a lot of them very quickly, but probably not all of them, and I know that I do not, so I need to have my cheat sheet here in front of me. So again, welcome to Atlanta. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was from right here in Atlanta. His childhood home is just a few miles from where we sit right now. Many of you know that Atlanta was the capital of the civil rights movement in the South, led by Dr. King and others. And today, in fact, happens to be the 55th anniversary of his assassination in Memphis. So obviously a pretty incredible event that happened in this country. There are services and observations happening at the King Center, not far from here, honoring his legacy and service. Plains, Georgia is home to President Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States and a Nobel Peace Prize winner. President Carter is currently under hospice care in Plains, and our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family and the former First Lady, I believe he is 98 years old, which is very impressive. But Georgia is also home to many popular actors and performers. How about actress Julia Roberts? She's from Smyrna, Georgia, about 10 miles from here, just up I-75. Actor, writer, producer, director Tyler Perry is from downtown Atlanta and lives not too far from here. And a guy called Ryan Seacrest, you guys have probably heard of him. He's from Dunwoody, just up off of 285 north of Atlanta. Obviously, you can't miss Ryan Seacrest, whether you're watching TV, you're listening to the radio. He seems to be all over the place. But what about music? Anyone here know the Allman Brothers? I think so. They are certainly famous Georgia musicians, but you might not even know who else came from here. The legendary songwriter Johnny Mercer from Savannah. Old school artists like Little Richard. Pretty interesting story with Georgia DOT's involvement in Little Richard. We actually relocated the Little Richard House, as we call it, in Macon, Georgia, and it has now become part of a community center as part of our I-16, I-75 reconstruction project. So pretty amazing effort and a interesting touch point between Georgia DOT and Little Richard. And also Ray Charles from Albany. Sticking with music, how about REM? I'm sure you've all heard of them. The B-52s from Athens. But what about Outkast, Ludacris, TLC, Sugarland, Driving and Crying, the Black Crowes, the Indigo Girls, and country greats like Alan Jackson, Jason Aldean, Cole Swindell, Thomas Rhett, Luke Bryan, and the Zac Brown Band, and many more, all from Georgia. These were the folks I couldn't tell you who they were. So whether you're leaving on a midnight train to Georgia, or if you were here on the night the lights went out in Georgia, or if you spent a rainy night in Georgia, or if Georgia's on your mind, or if you were ever headed down the Atlanta Highway to the Love Shack, or on that Highway 20 drive, or even if you thought about chasing waterfalls, or if you have ever shook it like a Polaroid picture, you thought about us here in Georgia. And remember that once upon a time, the devil went down to Georgia. And sometimes in the summer, it feels like he's still here. So here are a few fast facts about our state. We are the 8th most populated state with a population of 10.8 million people. In Metro Atlanta alone, we are upwards of 6.2 million people. Every year, we add about 100,000 residents to the Metro Atlanta region. So I like to tell people every day you wake up, there are 300 more people in Metro Atlanta than the day before. So if you're struggling with traffic, just remember that every day. 300 more than yesterday, 300 more tomorrow. The population of Georgia has tripled since 1960 and is expected to be the 5th largest in the country by 2040. We have 159 counties, which is the 2nd most in the nation behind Texas, and 538 cities. So when these guys work with local governments as we manage our bridge program, it is very granular, and we have a lot of local partners. 16 metropolitan planning organizations, those are cities above 50,000 in population. Agriculture is our #1 business, and it continues to grow. We like to tell people every chance we get that we have been called the #1 state in which to do business for 9 years in a row, and we're very proud of that. It's a great thing for our state, but of course brings considerations with regard to our transportation infrastructure, and that is played out front and center for us in this last General Assembly session as it relates to truck weights on our roadways. But the entertainment industry is quickly catching up to agriculture. While you're here in Georgia, you might see sites you recognize from TV or movies. Instead of calling it Hollywood, we fondly call it Yollywood. The film and TV industry brings billions of dollars to Georgia thanks to entertainment tax credits, and you'll see a lot of Atlanta and Georgia in movies and TV series. Everything from old favorites like Smokey and the Bandit, Fried Green Tomatoes, Forrest Gump, and Driving Miss Daisy, to newer films like the Hunger Games series, Black Panther, and Baby Driver. Funny story that Baby Driver, when that movie was being filmed here in Atlanta, they approached us at Georgia DOT and said, "We'd like to shut down the downtown connector to film a scene." And we kind of laughed at that and said, "How are we going to do that?" They're like, "Well, we really think it's important." And we had never been approached to handle anything like that. So we all kind of huddled up and said, "Well, what do we do about this?" Like, well, let's see if we can work with them and give them a permit with a relatively steep fee and see how they react. So we came up with $100,000 an hour, thinking there's no way they would do this. And it's got to be done at 1 o'clock in the morning, and thinking they would just kind of laugh and leave the room. So we said, "Well, how long would you like to close the connector for?" And they said, 3 hours. We said, "Well, that would be $300,000. They said, "Okay." Crap. True story. Should have asked for $200,000. And if you're into dramas or reality TV, we can't forget Bravo's Southern Charm Savannah, The Real Housewives of Atlanta, right? Or if you're into the Netflix series Stranger Things, a few years ago in season 3, you actually saw an Atlanta area mall transformed into the 1985 era mall called the Starcourt Mall. Other TV series filmed here include The Walking Dead, Ozark, and Vampire Diaries, as well as many others. You really can't watch much TV or movies without seeing Georgia these days. Georgia is home to some of the most recognized and revered corporations in the country, such as Coca-Cola, headquartered just down the road here, Delta Airlines, UPS, the Home Depot, and so many more, too numerous to name. And many of these companies have been working with Georgia DOT as we have updated our freight and logistics plan, trying to understand how freight is planning to grow over the next 20, 30 years here in Georgia, anchored by the Port of Savannah, Garden City Terminal down there on the coast. Georgia has the largest landmass east of the Mississippi River. We've got 15 interstates, all the way from I-16 to I-95 that connect directly to nearly a third of the continental U.S., and we are on the go. Our last annual vehicle miles traveled in Georgia was near 125 billion. A lot of traffic here in the state. We are home to the world's busiest airport, Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta. Some of you probably came through there. on travel to this location, serving more than 100 million travelers every year. And post-COVID, we've seen those numbers rebound very quickly. I mentioned Port of Savannah, the 4th busiest port in the U.S. as it relates to container movement, moving $800 billion worth of goods into and out of Georgia. It's very impressive. The top 3 are LA, Long Beach, New York City, and then Savannah. Top 4, I'm sorry. LA, Long Beach are considered 2. 79% of those goods are carried by trucks that leave the Port of Savannah and commercial vehicles to and from the port. So they get on our roadways, on our state routes, and on our interstate system. And we are the workhorse in moving those goods and services. Georgia also boasts the Brunswick port, which is the second busiest automobile port in terms of roll-on, roll-off movement in the United States. If you ever have a free moment, go on to Google Earth and go down to Brunswick, and you'll see the port, and then you'll see this whole area that looks like this big white blob outside of Brunswick. And you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, and you realize those are just car after car after car after car stacked up that are either leaving on ships or coming off of ships. And in our state, we love our sports. Just down the road is Mercedes-Benz Stadium, home of the Atlanta Falcons and home of Atlanta United FC, our MLS soccer team, MLS winning Atlanta United FC, and the Atlanta Braves, World Series champion Atlanta Braves, just up the road at Truist Park. But maybe the most important thing you should know about Georgia is that our success is based on its transportation network. And what we do as Georgia DOT and as collective partners to the department, managing, maintaining, operating, constructing our transportation system. A huge part of that is our bridge program and our bridge system that these 2 gentlemen take care of on behalf of Georgia DOT. With more than 15,000 total bridges in Georgia, that's a big job, whether repairing, replacing, preserving. It's a lot of work. Robbie and Donn are going to be sharing a lot more detail on how we accomplish this, but for now, on behalf of Georgia DOT, I want to say welcome. Hope you have a great time here in Georgia, here in Atlanta over the next couple days, and I'm glad to connect with you guys while we're here. So thanks again for being here, and enjoy the conference. Robbie?
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.